Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on MP Crossroads for a matchup between Empire and Brettonia. Now, previous to this match, I do want to say one of the interesting things, for those of you who haven't seen the Everchosen tournament, the Everchosen Invitational that they did a few days ago, they actually covered, well, basically whenever a matchup came up, I think in most if not all of the instances, they discussed the win rates for the factions involved. And one of the interesting things I saw was that apparently the Brettonia versus Empire matchup heavily favors Brettonia, supposedly, as far as win rates go. Apparently the win rate is something like 55-45 in Brettonia's favor. This surprised me, quite frankly. For those of you guys who are interested in this, I forget what part of it the video it is, but I will be sure to link down both of the Everchosen YouTube videos down below. If you're interested in seeing them, definitely worth a watch. A lot of fun, especially the final matchups were absolutely great. A lot of good games there, but it was something that honestly caught me by surprise. I kind of thought, in my opinion, that this is one of the easiest matchups for Empire to take because you're one of the only factions that can easily, and when I say easily, I mean easily, take on Brettonia in the cav game. And the Brettonian infantry is just so bad that Empire infantry can dumpster them pretty reliably. So I was quite frankly surprised. But apparently it's a problem. And so I wanted to sort of run a build here, demonstrate a little bit of what you can do as Empire to counteract Brettonia. I actually think all cavalry builds, for example, are pretty reliable here as well, but that is not what I did here. So quickly running over the things we've done. For my lord, I decided to bring Volkmar. This is actually a little bit of a divergence from what I usually do. Normally when I play Empire against Brettonia, I do usually bring Karl Franz, because I like the AP single target damage that he can deliver, especially if your opponent brings, say, Lewin, who's a surprisingly common pick. I don't think he's the most competitive, but he's common. But I wanted to try Volkmar, mostly because I had figured, you know what, the Grand Soulfire is pretty cool. 90% magic resistance in an area, which against Brettonian Knights, who all do magic damage, is pretty powerful. Grand Shield of Faith for that extra damage resistance, then of course Grand Hammer Sigmar, a 50-second plus 26 melee attack, and then the Jade Griffin, which of course replenishes HP and means that I've got passive heals. And then finally Benediction, which, you know, extra leadership's never bad. We do have a Light Wizard in here who does have False Protection, Net of Mintok, as well as a Power Stone. So the Net of Mintok is here to isolate enemy troops, to prevent my opponent, if he brings a lot of cavalry, from stacking on top of my cavalry at once, from getting the advantage. This is very important in cavalry games, is to isolate your opponent. False Protection just for a little bit of extra survivability. Power Stone, of course, for into magic. Royal Gryphites, as well as the Demigryph Knights, are covering this flank. One of the things I was considering going into this one was bringing 2 units of normal Demigryphs, because they perform fairly well against cav, and they do much better against infantry, but in the end I decided to go against it and simply went with more halberds. In the meantime, on the other side, we do have some Demigryph Knights with halberds, 2 units of them, though these guys are alone and unsupported. Then our front line, a lot of infantry. We've got 2 swordsmen and then 3 greatswords. Greatswords are amazing in this matchup, in my opinion. They completely trash most Brettonian infantry. They'll cleave through foot squires, and if your opponent goes with a lot of man span with a lot of men-at-arms, supported by peasant bows, greatswords will do amazing against them because they're really tanky and they can dish out a lot of hurt. For my opponent's build here, a bit of an interesting comp. He did decide to go with the Green Knight. Honestly, not a bad choice. Empire doesn't have too many magic options outside of Silver Bullets and say Lore of Fire or Lore of Shadows. And Volkmar, ironically, who I did bring here, so perhaps I'll be bringing Volkmar more often, I think. But regardless, the Empire doesn't have too many options for sniping out ethereal heroes like the Green Knight. And he does have the Dolorous Blade. He does have, I think my opponent accidentally forgot to remove the Sacred Guardian here. But nonetheless, he's a pretty powerful melee combatant who can dish out a lot of hurt. A front line of peasants here to screen out my front line to make sure my opponent gets the charge bonus, followed by 3 Battle Pilgrims. These guys, you know, they get a bad rap, but they're pretty good against Empire infantry. They're pretty good against cheap chaff. They hit pretty hard. They've got decent melee defense. They've got very good melee attack. Yeah, they're okay. It's still, they used to be a staple. Now I think they're just a sort of niche pick, but definitely not terrible. On either flank, Grail Knights. So a pretty potent pick. Of course, these guys actually in Lance formation do outtrade Demigryph Knights if they get a perfect charge and all that sort of stuff. Finally, here in the back, we do have 3 units of Knights Errant, a single unit of Peasant Bowmen, just the vanilla variant, to apply some pressure, and the Grail Relic over here. Now, Brettonian shooting was something I was a little concerned about because I was a little worried that if my opponent brings a bunch of mounted yeomen, I won't have too many counters. In the end, I figured, you know what, we'll risk it. I'll hope that my light wizard can snare some troops. Something I could have done alternatively was drop the great swords and get some free company in here, but or drop one unit of great swords for some free company. But I decided against it. Regardless, for my opponent's lord, he did bring the Fey Enchantress with the usual kit. Honestly, this is basically the perfect loadout. You've got Earthblood for regrowth, Arcane Conduit, Favor of the Fey, and the Bombardment spell. So lots of good stuff. Regardless, you can see, and of course the mists. You can see my opponent here pushing in with his Grail Knights, sort of trying to bait me in. He's going to pressure towards me, but I do not want... Now, granted, Knights Errant are not a competitive unit against the Demigryph Knights. They're not going to do great, but I figured, you know, if my opponent is able to hit me with Knights Errant first, and then come in with the Grail Knights from flank, I could be in deep trouble. So I'm actually going to pull these Demigryphs back, be set and ready to go if my opponent decides to pressure my swordsman. While over here, I am trying to commit and force a fight. I know that Volkmar has magic damage, which means he's a decent choice against the Green Knight, and if I can isolate and pick apart my opponent's troops, I can potentially get some good charges here. And you can see here we are committing. I'm going heavily after the Grail Knights. My opponent didn't use Lance Formation. Big mistake. And you can see we do get a lovely charge there. Seconds later, we do get a False Protection, which is providing a massive boost there to the survivability of the unit. With 155 armor, these guys are basically untouchable to the Grail Knights, at least once their charge bonus wears off. And you can see the Grail Knights, though, being counteracted, or having the damage counteracted with regrowth. So, and more physical resistance, which is going to make life difficult for the Demigryphs. But, unfortunately, these Knights Errant, who were there supporting, are going to get destroyed because they are not a unit meant to be in this sort of fight. The Light Wizard over here is going to try to disentangle himself. I'm trying to get him clear. In the meantime, my opponent getting a lovely bombardment here on the Royal Altdorf Gryphites, but Volkmar is in the pits. He's slugging out with the Green Knight, and Terror does kick in, forcing these Knights Errant off. Also, these Grail Knights getting slaughtered. The Royal Altdorf Gryphites, of course, such a good unit, and they are able to beat them despite the bombardment, despite all that damage, and we're going to be able to force them off the field. In the meantime, in the pits, if we look at the fight, you can see the cavalry engagement going very off. My opponent pulled back his Grail Knights, potentially looking to reinforce this flank before it collapsed, but that opened up an opportunity I exploited, hitting his Knights Errant with the Royal Altdorf or with the two Demigryph Knights, and destroying the Knights Errant. Here in the center pocket, you can see it is a massacre. Great swords against Battle Pilgrims and Peasants is not a contest. Great swords are amazing in this matchup, and you can see why here. As they tear through these Battle Pilgrims, they tear through all those units. You can see the swordsmen collapsing inward, getting that wrap, and just collapsing the Brettonians in a matter of seconds, despite the Grail Relic stiffening up the line. On the flanks, nothing much happening. I'm using the Royal Altdorf Gryphites, who do have respectable speed, to chase off the Grail Knights. Unfortunately, Grail Knights with their perfect vigor are going to be tough to catch, but I don't want these units coming back. With the Fey Enchantress still on the field, 15 Grail Knights could still be a game changer. Knights Errant, 21 Knights Errant can still be a nuisance too, so get them off the field. Honestly, one of the mistakes I made here was using the Royal Altdorf Gryphites for this, but, oh well. Hindsight's 2020. Here in the pits, Volkmar slugging it out with the Green Knight. I'm not entirely sure who's better in this matchup, to be quite honest with you guys, or who's got the better chance of winning. If you look at Volkmar, he's got 25% built-in magic resist, so the Green Knight isn't hitting him as hard. At the same time, the Green Knight does have slightly better melee stats. Yeah, I don't actually know. I think Volkmar might win just because of more HP, but it's going to be a tight fight regardless. In the meantime, we do get a nice little net on the Fey Enchantress, and then surround her with our Demigryph Knights, which of course is not where she wants to be. She's not really meant for a protracted engagements against units. She's good if you surround the Fey Enchantress with Knights, like say with something like Grail Knights, or Grail Guardians. And then she's just kind of like poking out of the formation, just jabbing people with her fingers, and whittling down their HP with Lord of the Lady. That is, or with the Fist of the Lady. That is really strong. But like this, she has no chance. And you can see, essentially at this point, it is game over. There is still a minute left on the match, mostly because the Green Knight is slugging out with Lewin, or not with Lewin. Wow, I can't even talk today. Volkmar. You can see, we fast forward at the minute mark. We do crush the Brettonians, they shatter. My opponent, though, was requesting that I let him fight, slug it out, and I'm like, you know what, who cares, why not? So you can see Volkmar here slugging it out with the Green Knight, and you can enjoy these final cinematics as we kill the Defender of Brettonia. So, if you're going in against Brettonia, this is not necessarily the only build you can do. You can do other stuff. You can drop some Demigryphs in favor of Outriders. You can... which are not a bad choice. Doubling up on, say, Outriders, or bringing Outriders and Outriders with grenade launchers could be a good choice as well. It gives you some counterplay against enemy skirmishers, against enemy mounted yeomen. It gives you some counterplay against, or something to poke at knights with. You can bring Free Company Militia, drop, say, a unit of Great Swords, bring two Free Company Militia just for the poke damage and just to zone off Mounted Yeomen a little bit better. Maybe even some Pistoliers. You could drop Demigryph Knights for 3 Pistoliers. I'm not sure that's a great idea, but you know, if you're worried about Mounted Yeomen and enemy skirmishers, that is something you can do. You can try different wizards. Honestly, there's a lot of magic that works with this setup. You can try to go with your own healing. Not a terrible choice. You can try to go with a lore of shadows because you can hit Enfeebling Foe and an Overcast Occam's Mindrazor in the cav fight, and that will give your troops a huge edge. Because you got to keep in mind, you're losing 20% damage normally to Grand Knights to their physical resist, which is the only real threat to Demigryph Knights. With Occam's Mindrazor, you get plus 40%, but you're also taking away 20% of your opponent's physical resistance, at least, assuming they aren't being hit by, say, a regrowth, which isn't effectively a 60% increase over what you'd normally be doing. So it's a really huge buff there. You can do Flaming Sword of Ruin for if you're just looking for that magic damage, and to bypass the physical resist. You could do Lore of Fire and then use bombardments as well to disrupt the Brettonians. Burning Head's not bad against Brettonian trash mobs. Honestly, there's basically, you can't go wrong. As long as you know what you're doing with your Lores of Magic, there's not a Lore of Magic in this, I don't think, that Empire has, except maybe Lore of Beast. I think Lore of Beast isn't that great in this. But except Lore of Beast, I don't think there is a lore that Empire has that's not good for this matchup in some way, shape, or form. I simply like Light because it allows me to net enemy cavalry out of place. If my opponent had, say, gone with a 4 Grail Knights, I could have pulled away, or say some Questing Knights mixed in with Grail Knights. I could have jumped one pocket of his cavalry, drop the net to keep the rest of the cavalry out of the fight, slaughter that one pocket, and then deal with the other pocket in due time. So that's really the main reason for the net there. But yeah, otherwise, you know, the Great Sword's great choice against the front line. Even if you drop a Great Sword in favor of, say, Free Company, the 2 Great Swords will still do an immense job against trash chaff units. If your opponent goes with Foot Squires, the Great Swords will still beat them. It's just going to be a little bloodier, and you know, Great Swords are really solid. They're honestly one of the most underrated units in the game, in my opinion. Swordsmen, you know, they're just filler. You can just replace them with whatever the heck you wanted. I don't know. And yeah, Demigryphs. They're not a great unit against infantry. There's no denying that. I've actually run some tests, and they actually perform a lot worse against infantry, especially heavily armored infantry, but I would assume even normal infantry, than vanilla Demigryphs. I was actually surprised. But against Brettonia, you do want that domineering edge in the cav fight, just in case your opponent overcommits to the cav fight. And so yeah, Demigryphs, in my opinion, are the way to go, and they'll still dominate Brettonian infantry. If your opponent decides to bring, say, there's a lot of pole arms, you can always just cycle charge them or use the Great Swords to crack them. But nonetheless, interesting comp from my opponent. Definitely an interesting choice with the Green Knight. I might be running Volkmar more often just because this is kind of something worth keeping in mind. I actually kind of forgot about the Green Knight entirely. But he's definitely a powerful choice. He's definitely a threat if you're not ready. The front line here, I think, is a bit of a mistake. I don't think, granted, my opponent committed very heavily, and the mix of Knights Errant with this sort of front line, I think, is a little bit of a mistake. Better off going, I think, with either some Foot Squires maybe, or some cheaper front line even, and then try to get some more elite cav, or just not bother with this many Knights Errant, try to get some Foot Squires and more decent infantry core. But regardless, good game to my opponent. New name here, definitely had a lot of fun. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below if you've not already. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, as usual, don't hesitate to ask or don't hesitate to post down below. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. So I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.